Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. There were some technical difficulties on our end. But I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. The Allegheny Mountain Institute is an educational nonprofit working to cultivate healthy communities through food and education. We strive to meet our mission through a three-pronged approach, which includes an 18-month tuition-free farm and food system fellowship, institutional support for schools and hospitals, and regional networking to build food systems that nourish our bodies, our environment, and our economy. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Spinner, a community fellow. I will be hosting / facilitating this workshop. I'd like to remind you that this is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube page. So if you would not like to be recorded, you can certainly turn off your video. Also, everyone is on mute, but if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat and I will be monitoring it throughout so I can answer any questions. Also, the last 15 minutes, we will try to dedicate time to answering any questions. Now I'd like to pass things over to Pat. He is the Director of Market Farming here at Allegheny Mountain Institute, and he'll be teaching us all about planning your garden, from deciding what to grow, spacing, to seasonality and seed ordering.
It's cool. It's like a walk-up intro now instead of a normal Zoom meeting. Welcome everybody again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. As we're all still trying to figure out Zoom. Hopefully we don't have to figure out Zoom here, in the future, but thanks for hanging with us. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Pat Banks. I'm the Director of Market Farming for Allegheny Mountain Institute. I've been managing the farm at the AMI Farm at Augusta Health, which is a collaboration between our local hospital here in Fishersville, Virginia, and Allegheny Mountain Institute. Most of the food we grow goes directly into the food system via outreach with food access in the kitchen and cafeteria, and our pilot program, which is a food pharmacy program that diabetic patients and their families get prescribed an education, and they come and get produce from our farm. So it's an exciting project, and I'm glad to be here. So just to start off, I want to do a quick overview of what this class will kind of be we'll be talking about. First, I want to start talking about reflecting on the previous year, just some things to consider when you're looking at starting growing in your space. What kind of goals do you have? Kind of mapping out what your area looks like. What should you grow? Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty and talk about seasonality. And I have a lot of samples of what we do here at the farm. I know that's going to look a lot differently to most home growers and gardeners, but I like to use my farm as an example, and then kind of give examples around what you can do in the home scale. We're going to talk a little bit about succession planting and companion planting. We're talking a bit about season extension and seed ordering, and then like Sarah still have questions at the end. And if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat box, and Sarah will field them as they come in. So yeah, let's get started. So to start things off, what are your goals? It's always something I ask myself every year here at the farm, and then I think in general it's a good question to ask for what you're growing for. Who are you growing for? Will help determine how much you need to grow for each plant and variety. You can really dive down the research wormhole on like how much one plant can produce. There's an old saying, like one summer squash plant, could feed your family for the year. So if you're growing for yourself, you're growing for your family, growing for your friends, growing to make a little bit of side money, or growing to preserve can. Doing all that research out there on the internet. We could teach a whole class around how much each plant could produce and what to do with it. But having that mindset of what are your goals for the year? You want to have food all year. That's possible with the right planning. When and how long do you want to have the produce? So do you want to have early spring, late fall, all winter? Those are questions to be asking yourself. And do you want to just grow annual vegetables, or do you want to grow, perennials? My mindset's more focused around, we do a lot of annual production here, but we're starting to look more into perennials. But, if you're looking for fruit berry trees, that's all questions to ask, what kind of produce and what kind of product are you looking to get? And then what kind of aesthetics are you looking for? out here on the farm at Augusta Health, it's very, row oriented and, straight lined and like laid out for efficiency because we have a small space. It's about 1 acre in size, but, there's, having a Zen garden and, having a place of respite is all things to consider and things I consider in my home garden as well. Other things to consider is so getting more into the kind of nitty gritty of where to place your garden or what you have available to you. Location is probably the biggest one to think about. So a good rule of thumb for growing your vegetables or growing, any plant, they typically, you can go into specific plant varieties of how much sunlight each plant needs. However, a general rule of thumb for most vegetables is 6 to 8 hours of sunlight to grow. So having sun access, southern facing, kind of porch or patio or a garden is always going to be the best. And how are you watering your plants? Is there a spigot out there? Are you carrying water? Or do you have water tanks? All things to think about when you're planting your garden. And then, or do you, there's other things too. Like, do you even need to water your plants? Can you heavily mulch that with, straw or leaves or other, retaining material like that? And do you want to, and then also think about like protection. So predators, animals, fencing, what's going to get at it and how are we going to keep those deer and those pesky rabbits out of the garden? Cool. Then when you think about, after we think about our location, sun, access to water, animals, predator, now think about just like, I guess, growing space in general and what's available to you. I know a lot of people, when you think about home gardening, raised beds is often, often the first thing that comes to mind. However, you don't have to have, if you're growing in this, if you're growing on the ground and with soil underneath, depending on your soil, most places, especially here in Virginia, it's going to be, it might take a little fertilizer, but you can grow in the ground because it can be pretty cost effective to, put up a raised bed with lumber and then shipping in soil. While there's that, but there's also benefits to raised beds where, like if you're, you don't need to, you can, like for calisthenics, like you don't need to bend over as much in a raised bed. So there's cost and benefits to both. But there's also, container gardening when you can get a potting soil with pots and plants, pots on your back porch, a 5-gallon bucket or an equivalent of, into a potting medium. That could produce a good crop of potatoes and peppers and eggplant and stuff like that. So then there's another, other areas growing is alternative growing methods such as straw bale gardening or vertical growing. So if you have space, if you have, concrete, there are ways to grow just about anywhere. Another thing to consider is what are we going to do? We're going to start seeds or we're going to direct sow the seeds. There's benefits to both. Obviously with starting seeds, greenhouse comes to mind. We have a big greenhouse out here, but a sunny area with a windowsill for your a home scale kind of scene is plenty. There's also grow lights with fluorescent lights that you can put the lights on a shelf and grow that way. And then also in terms of direct seeding and seed starting, having that, excuse me one second. Sorry, the benefits of having starting your own seeds, starting your transplants is you're going to have us jump to the year. So in March and April, when you want to plant out some of your broccoli or kale or brassicas like that, you can start those in February or January and have more of a start on the season for that soil temperature warm up. Then there's direct sowing. So direct sowing is more common, I guess, in the home scale world. The negatives of direct sowing is that it's going to take a while in the spring to get your seeds to start. The soil temperature needs to heat up. So that's my next point on here is when you're thinking about planting your plants in the ground, your soil temperature needs to heat up to a point of, getting that seed to germinate. So it's around, 50, 60 degrees. And that can take some time in the spring. That's a benefit for seed starting, but direct seeding, is very efficient in cost for, you don't need to you don't need to have those. You don't need to have like a greenhouse or a space to grow transplants. You can have, you can just throw the seeds right in the ground. Yeah. All right. Next slide. All right, some other things to consider is growing zones. So here in Virginia, we're in growing zone 6. These zones are now split up into 6A and 6B. So we're in 6B in here in Fishersville, Virginia. So a little fun activity I like to do is everybody in the chat could just throw in where their growing zone is. That'd be fun to hear where you're all from. So let's take a second. All right. This growing zone is typically used for getting a first and last frost date. So if you find where you are on the map, just give a quick Google search for here in Virginia, Fishersville, Virginia, first and last frost date. That'll help. That'll show you your first and last frost date. But this map's more specifically for perennials. A lot of perennial production is for like how harsh the winter is. So when you're thinking about perennial plants and like fruit trees and raspberry trees and blueberry trees, this is where this map's going to help out efficiently. So next slide. Deciding what to grow. Okay, so when we're deciding what we got our space. We know what zone we are. We know we're starting seeds. Now, what are we going to grow? First thing I always like to consider when starting seed or growing is soil fertility. What are we working with? If you grew last year, what grew well and what didn't grow well? What areas do need addressing? Because when you think about growing veggies and growing plants in general, it's going to take up a lot of nutrients. So we have to think about giving back. When you think about a plant in the woods or a tree, how they survive so long, when the leaves drop, they decompose through the year, and then that provides carbon and nutrient back to the tree for nutrients for the following year. And that's how the mindset we have to have when we're doing annuals and perennials too. So when you're looking to start your growing season this year, are we adding compost? Always a big fan of compost. It's not only going to provide nutrients on the chemical side for the plants, but also get a biological activity rolling. Get that biological activity rolling for to help your plants out as well. But if you don't have access to compost, or if you're not making your own compost, a typical fertilizer will do well for you. So something like a 3-2-2, you see those in the stores. What the 3-2-2 represents is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are the big three that have been recognized in the early 1930s, 1940s as like the main chemicals for plants. However, there are a lot of macronutrients that I'm not going to get into because I could spend a whole hour-long conversation talking about soil health. But always look for organic. In my opinion, always look for organic, kind of a low nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizer to start. If you're starting to see deficiencies in your plant, like stunted growth or yellowing leaves, those represent like lack of nitrogen or phosphorus in those plants. Kind of rule of thumb too, just to kind of wrap that all together on soil fertility is, you need to feed your soil to feed your plants. And as we continue to grow plants out here and in your home scales, you need to continue to feed your soil to have those nutrients for those plants to access. So after you've got to have your soil fertility decided, desired yield, going back to kind of like what your goals are. Like a tomato plant, we hope for 50 pounds per tomato plant out here. That's a ambitious goal, but something to think about when you're growing a squash, when you're growing a tomato, when you're growing peppers. How much of that you're going to grow on one plant, and what are you going to use with it? And there are many online resources for how much is in a 10-foot row of radishes, for instance, or again, like how much a tomato plant will produce. And then you want to look for variety of crop. So like specifically, if you can ideally if you could do it yourself, but seed saving on your own scale is always going to be the best option. Plants are very adaptable, and they adapt in their environment. If you can save your own seed, it's great, but using seed companies in your area is always a good option too. For this area, Southern Seed Exchange is kind of our go-to local seed provider. And these areas are bred in Virginia. They're in this climate where there are companies we order from, like Johnny Seeds up in Maine. We buy a lot from them, but I continually buy more from Southern Seed Exchange every year, just because seeing there's something to be said about the plant being bred in the area where you're growing. And then paying attention to variety of what kind of variety you're getting. There's a lot of disease resistant packages out there with for instance, I'm gonna use tomatoes as an example. Something we struggle with here on the farm is like late blight or early blight, fungal diseases. And there's a lot of plants out there that have disease resistance beyond that. So if that's, if there's something you're struggling with in the past, looking at those varieties of crops and like really getting specific on what you're looking for, like slow to bolt lettuce, like heat resistant lettuce heads. It's hard for us to grow lettuce here, so we grow very specific varieties during the summer. So keep that in mind when you're think about what you want to grow. And then succession planting. Something that that I like to preach here is that we can get a lot of crops out of one row. Right now we have some radishes planted in one of our tunnels. In that row, we could get 3 to 4 crops out in 1 year. So, and that's called a succession, meaning when we rip those radishes out, the succession is going to be, tomatoes, or then when we rip the tomatoes out, it's going to be kale. So those are succession planting. So you can get multiple crops out of one area. But when we're doing that, I want to keep in mind crop rotation, and that's the difficult game to play when you're, thinking about planting and you're thinking about what crops are going in and out. So, that's rotation. Just a quick excerpt on that. Typically, a good rule of thumb is just in 3 years, in 3 year spacings. Don't plant the same, crop variety or crop in general. I guess I wouldn't be too concerned with planting tomatoes 1 year in a raised bed and then a year or two later planting peppers. But if you're going to plant tomatoes again 3 years in a row, you're going to start seeing disease resistant build up in that soil. And when I was talking about those fungal diseases, those soil-borne diseases are going to be in that soil. Those are some things to keep in mind. Timing and seasonality, that's more of what grows well, what time of the year. A good rule of thumb for that is, broccoli, kale, cabbage. That stuff's going to grow really well in the spring and really well in the fall. But in the summer, it really struggles because of the heat. And that's where tomatoes and peppers do really well. So thinking about what crops grow well in what season. And then how much time are you going to spend maintaining, having a trellis set up for your pole beans, or, pruning and, pruning cucumbers or tomatoes. How much time do you want to spend on these crops? Can determine how much effort you want to, what you want to plant and how much effort you want to put into it. And then we'll touch later on this, but what grows well together? What kind of companion plants can we do? Yep.
Baxter asked, in a season that you have the longevity to grow multiple runs on the same bed within the season, is there a hard, fast rule of how long to wait between successions of crops?
Hard, fast rule on debate succession of crops. Honestly, if you're gonna go multiple crops like we do out here, I know on some areas of our farm we're gonna get 3 or 4 crops out of a row. I'm looking for. I don't want to leave the soil bare ever. I want to get crops in and out as quickly as possible. Because when when that soil's bare, there's no roots in the ground. You're exposing it to heavy rains, washing away nutrients. So I would say if you're going to put a cover crop or if you're going to put a new crop in, as quickly as possible. Okay. All right. Bed and row arrangement. So we got our space, we got our plants. We know what we're planting now. How much do we put in the bed? So plant spacing, different plants have different space requirements. It's kind of hard. So when you read a pack, you can read skip ahead a bit. You can read the back of your seed packet. It's going to say, I'm going to use broccoli as an example. Broccoli, 18-inch plant spacing. That's 18 inches between each plant, and then there's rows. So plant is kind of like I look at it like a vertical and a horizontal. So vertical is going to be plant spacing, and the horizontal is going to be row spacing. Row spacing is typically a lot longer than your plant spacing. However, on the as in the movement of small scale farming here, it's kind of been we're moving the row spacing closer and closer. So, for example, on the back of a seed packet of broccoli could read 18-inch plant spacing, 2-foot row spacing. Well, we're moving that to 18. We're bumping it up. So, but the closer you get with your plants, you're gonna get a significant size difference. So, for instance, with kale, if you plant those kale varieties really tight in there, you're gonna get really small. You're gonna get really small leaves because they're gonna grow and they're gonna outshade each other. But if you want to get like nice big kale leaves, like I like to plant them wider apart, wider row spacing, wider plant spacing. And that's kind of touching on intensive versus more space. And more of a conventional vegetable farm or garden will have a lot of area, a lot of row space. We can plant those big plants, give a lot of room. But here we like to pack them in and get a lot of crop out. But the risk of that is that we are like limiting airflow and spacing. So when trying to get airflow through the crops is it's just a difficult difficult when you're cramming things in tight. And I just want to touch a bit about reading your seed packet. First off, it's important to store your seeds in a cool, dry environment. That's going to be the longevity of your seeds. That's what's really going to help them out. But I don't like to plant personally. Don't like to plant anything that's 3 or 4 years old. I've just noticed a lot of failures in our seed starting, a lot of failures in our direct seeding, and it's nothing more frustrating than direct seeding a row of carrots it's very hard and you pay really good attention to, and then only like one spot pops up every foot or so. So I like to use, the newer the seed, the more, obviously the better it's going to be at germinating. But with proper storage, that said it could last for, 10 plus years, even longer. And also on a seed packet, we have days of maturity. So you'll see a 55 days for a broccoli plant or 75 days for, cauliflower. Those are all good guidelines. However, it depends on when you plant the broccoli or the cauliflower or the whatever you have, and where a day length is at. And if we're planting a broccoli plant in April or March, that's going to take a lot longer to develop due to just a cooler environment, cooler soil temperature, and then shorter day lengths. But if we plant that same broccoli plant mid-April or mid-May, it's going to be instead of 55 days, it might be 45 or 50. Where the other planted in March might be actually 60 days. So it's a good guideline, but don't when you're mapping out your garden, don't circle 60 days and this is when it's going to be, because I would bet it's going to be quite different. Yep.
Penelope asked, are the seed packets up to date on listing the zones, including the A and B zones?
They don't. Most seed companies aren't going to put what zone, a zone growing on it. They're just going to have, your days of maturity, and it's going to be a ballpark estimate for, for yourself to kind of figure out. But again, going back, using that as guideline, and there are certain crops that grow well, like onions, for instance, we have long day, intermediate day, and short day onion varieties, and using those it's a very day length dependent crop. So it's kind of crop specific as well. Anything else? Okay. I lost my spot. All right. Moving on to just quick recap on, what some cool season crops that we grow here and can grow in Virginia well. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, collards, all those brassicas, kale and kohlrabi and radishes. And then, stuff that's not, as cold hardy as that is going to be like your lettuce mix, Swiss chard, beets. Those are just a few cool season crops to throw at you. And then this next slide is more of a sample of what we grow here at the AMI Farm in Augusta Health. And I put this out with in mind of field only. So I'm trying to, we actually planted some stuff this week, but it's inside of tunnels, and we'll get to some season extension stuff. But this field only stuff is, we're starting onions, leeks, and broccoli and cauliflower in our greenhouse. Again, those are things you could start under grow lights, in your home or on a porch or a closed-in patio that gets a lot of light. We start these in anticipation of planting, in March. And that's underneath. A caveat that is underneath a cloth, which we call a row cover. But most of this would survive the March, April weather. A few things that we, are typically direct sown are spinach. Spinach, but we, as you notice on our left hand side, in the greenhouse, we start our spinach. That's just to get a head start on, again, going back to that soil temperature. That our first round direct seed spinach is going to be in March, but we also want to transplant around too to get a head start on the season. So February we're starting all of our brassicas, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, Swiss chard's not in the brassica family, but we'll start that too. Some herbs, celery. Now all that stuff is pretty much planned to be planted in March. Then March we're thinking towards our frost date. So May 15th here in Virginia and 6B. May 15th is our frost date. And just a note on frost date, that's average frost date. So that means, we've had, like last year we had a frost May 18th, I think. And, we haven't had a frost the entire month of April in my tenure here. So those are all averages. But May 15th is a good guideline, and pay attention to the weather before you plant out your tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. If it's going to be another week, they're better off holding them inside than you would be to plant them in the field or in your gardens. But March is typically tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. There a few of the varieties, a few crops take a lot longer to develop. And tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cherry tomatoes, they're about 8 weeks out from your last frost days when you typically want to plan on doing that. Then April, we're starting our summer squash, cucumbers, and winter squash. Those are, some things that folks will, have told me that they do better at, direct seeding. However, I found that, with space being a issue here, we start a lot of stuff that typically wouldn't. So if you're looking if you have a row of radishes that are about 2 weeks out and you want to put summer squash in there immediately, but want to jumpstart on it, an idea could be starting your summer squash inside in trays. And then in 2 weeks, those radishes will be ready to eat and process. Then you put your summer squash plant in. But those are just a few items we start during the spring here. Direct seeding, we really don't do any field direct seeding in February. In March, we'll start our radishes, carrots, beets, spinach, and lettuce mix. We'll start direct seeding all that. And then April, when we talk about succession planting, every 2 weeks and that's a good guideline. If you want to have carrots or beets or spinach or lettuce mix or lettuce heads all year, at 2 weeks intervals, you'll either need to direct seed or start them inside if you want to eat your carrots all year or your beets. So then the succession is going to happen. You'll have your beets. We might have 3 or 4 successions of beets or carrots out in our field at any given time. Some just started, some at medium way, and then others we're harvesting. April pretty much typically looks like that for us too. Just kind of continuing on with planting that stuff. Turnips will be in there. This is just a kind of a short list for you. And then May we'll direct seed corn. I put squash in there because sometimes we do that. And then okra and beans are kind of rounding us out with direct seeding. We'll be doing those successions throughout the summer too. Just another kind of a slide around succession planting. Again, planting the same crop in the 2 weeks apart is a general guide. But thinking back to when I was talking about the sun and, day length during the solstice, summer solstice, we're going to be, if you plant 2 weeks before the summer solstice, a crop of, carrots and the same crop, the same variety, 2 weeks apart, those are going to come in pretty close to each other just because the sun is so intense and the things are growing so fast. Another way to do succession planting is having day length, going back to the seed packet, getting 2 different varieties of seeds. So like going back to broccoli, two broccoli varieties will allow you to, like with different day lengths, like 55 and 65, and you plant them at the same time. That's a good way to succession plant as well. So you have broccoli, for a week or two instead of just 1 week. Yeah, and then when we're thinking about succession planting, is always an end date, right? So if you're going to plant a cucumber plant at the middle of September, it's a big chance with your last frost date being April 15th that you're not going to get a crop out of that. So kind of always when I'm out here, I'm always thinking what's happening next, or what's the danger here. So next slide. Then just to continue on of what we do throughout the summer, we continue our succession plantings of summer crops in July. But in July, we're really starting to think about, what's happening in the fall. And as a farmer, it's a difficult thing to do when, you're in the thick of things with tomatoes and peppers and disease and hot, and then you're trying to think of like, all right, getting your brassicas ready for, late August, because you can get two plantings of, broccoli, or 2 plantings of kale, or 2 plantings of kohlrabi within the same year. The fall, the struggle is going to be in August or late August when you have to plant these crops to get a broccoli head. Is keeping those things alive during the late summer months of August. And then we're also thinking about some overwintered stuff as well at that time. And in August, we really start thinking about what we can overwinter in our on our space. Stuff like chard and brassica, more brassicas, onions, lettuce heads, lettuce mix. Those are stuff we need to start and get those planted in by no later than October. So starting those in August is what we're thinking about. And then talking about direct seeding, we're still continuing on in July with our usual, but in August we start to reseed our radishes, arugula, and turnips, along with our beets and carrots. And again, going back to difficulty of growing this in August here in Fishersville is that it's August is typically a dry, hot month. So switching things with soil temperature. In the springtime, we struggle with how cold it is. In the summertime, we struggle with how hot it is. So, we want to get that soil temperature colder for stuff like, spinach or carrots or beets to germinate and keep it wet and moist. So those are the difficulties we struggle with August. But, if we get them germinated and started, they, in September starts cooling off and should get a nice crop. And then spinach, spinach. In September, we start direct seeding spinach and thinking about, our last successions of beets and carrots in our field. September is pretty much the deadline for carrots and beets. But again, lettuce mix, stuff like that, we can continue on.
We got one question, Pat. Kathy asked, do you find that fall broccoli keeps producing in the spring if you cover it in the winter? And she is located in Harrisonburg.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Sarah, you're on yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay,
yeah. Do you find that fall broccoli keeps producing in the spring if you cover it during the winter? And she's located in Harrisonburg, for reference.
Broccoli keep producing through the winter?
If you cover it, yes.
I haven't had a whole lot of experience with covered broccoli in the field or outside. I would have to imagine it would. If it's just going to take a lot longer, a lot more to get that. You're going to want that plant to be at a good heading size, so the leaves start opening the broccoli. At around October, and then it's going to be a slow growth from there. I would caution though with disease. If it's raining, the benefit of the winter growing is that you have a lot of time to harvest. However, there's a lot of time for bugs and a lot of time for disease to happen inside those heads as well. So I would say I would bet it would, but I have no direct experience with it.
Thanks, Pat.
Cool. Then I want to touch a bit about companion planting. So certain plants do really well, you know, and even benefit from, you know, being planted next to others. A few things. I just want to touch upon the definition first of companion planting. So kind of there's two or more types of plants, two basic ones, two or more types of plants that are grown together, and then having one of those plants benefit, you know, that it's named, one of the plants are benefiting from either plant. Some of those benefits can improve, you know, improve soil health. Legumes like planted alongside any plant will provide nitrogen. You know, the more roots in the soil, the healthier it's going to be. And different plants have different plants have different roots. So, for instance, carrots and tomatoes grow well together. When you pull that carrot out of the ground, it's gonna create more aeration for those tomato roots to grow into. And there's some like folklore around that's not a benefit. I threw it in there. Some folklore around it is that, you know, it's been said in the past that, you know, planting basil with your tomatoes, you know, makes your tomatoes sweeter. I don't know if it's ever been proven, but I like to think it has been proven. So we often do that here at the farm. But it's also taking advantage of space. You know, we grow in really thin beds, and we can plant a tomato plant and a basil plant together. And having more roots in the ground is always going to be beneficial. Weed and pest control. That's another one, a big one for planting, interplanting or companion planting. You can grow ground cover to suppress weeds, such as like what we do out here. We'll grow, you know, we'll grow clover and brassicas. After like our last kind of cultivation, we'll throw down clover, and that'll you know, germinate. We'll have a cover for weeds, and we'll also have that clover be fixing nitrogen in our soils. They also can provide support. You know, I'm going to speak a little bit about Three Sisters gardening in a second, but you know, having like plants as trellises, and then growing beneficial flowers for you know, insects. You know, if you have a big pest problem, like identifying your pest problem, looking at you know, what flowers can benefit, you know, bringing in those beneficial bugs to help combat your you know, your problems. And a note on that is that, you know, something I struggle with here too is that to have beneficial bugs and like prey, like, you know, like your ladybugs or your green lacewings, to eat, let's say aphids, for instance, on your tomatoes, you need to have those aphids need to be there for them to, you know, for them to be there. So it's kind of, you're trying to balance an ecosystem when you're thinking about attracting beneficials, if that's a route you want to go. Then I put in there too, just trap cropping. You know, you can plant a row of, let's say, cucumbers, for instance, in a row of like at the end of a bed that you don't have cucumbers in, but a bed, you know, a bed you might have across from your garden is going to have your cucumbers. However, you're trying to attract all the, you know, the cucumber beetles to that plant. So, yeah, that's what I put a note in there about, you know, Three Sisters gardening. I know this is a very popular one, but this is the origin of, you know, of companion planting. Native Americans often planted, you know, beans, corn, and squash together, and that's the Three Sisters. You know, corn would grow up, provide a trellis for the beans. The beans would provide nitrogen for the corn, and then the squash in the ground would provide weed suppression for all the crops. So that's a little bit about Three Sisters gardening, where kind of companion planting came from. Just a few that go well together. Honestly, alliums, onions, bunching onions. We plant them everywhere, pretty much. Most things hate them. Most bugs hate them. Most, you know, most pests don't bother them. But I personally love them, and pretty popular item. I spoke about a little bit about tomatoes and basil and beans and corn. So those are a few that grow well together. Some that don't grow well together. Peas and beans. With alliums, they're said to stunt the growth. And there's a few others too as well, but just wanted to touch on what grows well and what doesn't grow well together. I know we're running short on time. I know I'm talking fast, so I'm gonna try to speed up a bit so we have some questions here at the end. But just a note on some season extension stuff we use. I talked about row cover. What row cover is like a thin thin cloth that we use. It can be thin or thick, but it's more like think about a blanket over your plants. So you set it up with hoops, and you kind of create a little tunnel in the field or over your raised bed. A picture would have been good here, but having like it's like essentially a blanket covering from frost protection, from insect protection. It's good for both cool weather and warm weather. We also have greenhouses, which is typically the difference between a greenhouse and a high tunnel. If you're familiar with that language, is a greenhouse is going to be heated. High tunnels typically not. And there's arguments about both of those, and then there's low tunnels too, which is what I was describing above, as a made tunnel with little hoops. Again, benefits. We're controlling in a greenhouse in a high tunnel. We can control. That's a plastic structure. We can control the irrigation, so that's a big one. We provide a layer of warmth. It's also going to retain heat. Protects from the elements. Wind's a large one that really damages plants especially when it freezes. So if it's windy outside and your plants are frozen, it's going to whip. It's going to break the plants and ultimately affect them. And then insect protection and predator protection too as well. Then I like to throw in some negatives. For us, it's a lot of work to put those up. But there's the benefit always negative on that one for us. Greenhouse and high tunnels and stuff like that can be really expensive. And then, there's a lot of plastic involved. I know it's it's kind of, always something to be thinking about is, small scale farmers and small scale growers is, our plastic consumption. There's a lot of it. So it's always in the back of my mind. We kind of touched on seed ordering. I think we can kind of skip over that one. I guess just a few notes is set a budget. And don't forget what kind of shipping costs there can be. And some seed companies I recommend. I mentioned Johnny's Seed Company. They're out of Maine, but they have a lot of good varieties in terms of disease package. They're very good breeders and really good to work with. Southern Exposure, which is down here in Virginia. I've always ordered seeds from them. They always perform well. We also order from High Mowing Organic, Seed Savers, and there's a lot of smaller companies out there too as well. A few books to look into. Carrots Love Tomatoes is kind of the most popular, one of the more popular companion planting books. And in terms of planting schedules, Vegetable Gardening in the Southeast from Ira Wallace. She's from Virginia, farms just over the valley in Charlottesville. Always a good resource. And then there's oodles of YouTube videos and online, and I could list 1,000 of them. But anyway, we want to leave some time, about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Pat. And again, sorry for all the technical difficulties. We've been switching computers around. But if you'd like to ask any questions, you can put them in the chat. And I'm going to go back to the companion planting slide, just because we switched over it really fast. And someone asked to look at it. So there it is for reference. And a question that we got during it that we didn't get to answer was, someone had a question about butternut squash. She asked, when and how should you trim a butternut squash so you get a few big squash? I'm not sure if you know, but we can also look it up later.
So with all cucurbits, most solanaceae, like cucurbits, cucumbers, winter squash, summer squash even probably, they're going to produce sucker plants. So you're going to see, it's going to be hard to describe a bit, but you got a main stem, you're going to have your main stem, that's going to be your plant, but you're going to see side shoots grow out of your both your winter squash plants and your cucumbers. It's going to be a tendril. You're going to have a tendril, a flower, and then a secondary stem. Pruning that secondary stem and not allowing it to sprawl is going to, it's going to both produce more butternut squash, but also bigger ones. And if you remove, if you were to remove the flower leaf or the fruit leaf of, say you had, 10 leaves on your butternut squash plant, if you removed, just clipped off the flower plant initially, it's going to put all its energy into whatever, flowers there. So I don't have direct experience with butternut squash, but I'm led to believe that we do that with cucumbers and stuff like that.
Awesome, thanks. Someone else asked, are there any deer-proof veggies that you know of?
I would say onions are pretty, I don't have we have a pretty deer-proof fence, but I tend to stay away from onions. Man, I don't know. We fortunately don't have that problem. I know a lot of veggies they do like, which is almost all of them, but in terms of keeping deer away, any kind of sense like humans like hair clippings. If you cut your own hair, put that around your garden. It's going to deter them, or like any kind of fence. I've heard people putting fishing line, so kind of fencing out your garden with maybe T-posts. No, fencing can be expensive, but put like a fishing line, something they can't see, and then they run into it and they can't see it and they get like kind of freaked out. I've read about it, but I've never done it. But some ideas on deer proofing.
Someone did say in the chat that the deer left her squash alone. So.
Oh, nice.
Someone asked about any great tomato varieties that are resistant to blight.
So just something we've transitioned to on our farm, and I know on a home scale it's not quite attainable, but it is attainable, but a little more thought. We grow all our tomatoes indoors now. I would say in variety, like indoors as in underneath like plastic, like in a greenhouse or a high tunnel, just because there are a lot of like disease resistant varieties like big beef, or like there's these, very BHN 89, like these not very well named ones. But there are a lot of, I'd say big beef is going to be your standard kind of disease or variety in terms of blight. However, you still see that a lot, especially if you're growing them outside. However, it's still going to produce a ton. It's just we're looking, out here on our scale, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to produce an extra ton. So, yeah.
Okay, so another question. Penelope asked, is there any way to mitigate the soil now to kill any insects or bugs that have already been there from last season?
Yeah. There's a few bugs out there like cucumber beetles, aphids. They overwinter in your soil. So if you had a big problem, tarping it, or like putting, a piece of like landscape fabric over your say it's a raised bed, and leaving that for like, a couple like a month or so in like April before planting it, it's going to heat up that soil really, really well to, kill off those bugs. Also, just like rotating crops really helps with that as well. So if you're going to rotate, like say a cucumber beetle problem, one raised bed or one plot of your garden, moving that to another plot is going to confuse those bugs, and they're not going to be really sure where they're going. In terms of disease resistance, is that with soil-borne disease? There is a method I've been looking to research myself, but it's called biofumigating, which is growing a mustard crop that apparently cleanses your soil. So it's a cover crop. But just cover cropping in general really, kind of breaks up. You're going to, kind of incorporate that cover crop in your soil. As good biological guys are going to get in there and hopefully cleanse your soil as well. So.
Thanks. And someone else also asked about critter control. They're in Northern Virginia and are having problems with chipmunks.
Chipmunks. Oh man. I've never had too many chipmunk problems. I guess the first thing that went to mind is a cat. If you're able to have an animal in your house, cats are awesome prey animals. I wish we could here at the hospitals have a bunch of animals to help protect the garden, but we can't, just due to the nature of the project. And I'm not sure. I'd have to look up how to control chipmunks.
They are small. Someone asked of any good advice for growing eggplants, especially companion planting, that you might know
of. Companion planting eggplants. I don't have any specific like plants that have grown well. I do know, like for us, flea beetles are a huge problem in eggplants. So I know like Alliums, like bunching onions, stuff like that, that's going to deter those flea beetles. And in terms of growing good eggplant, you know, a tip for that is going to be, we use, you know, using a row cover, like I was talking about, a cover to block insects from coming in. We also use something called kaolin clay, which is, you know, we use it both for our eggplant and our cucurbits, our summer squash, winter squash, and cucumbers. It's essentially, it's a, I don't know if I can't type in the chat, but it's KAOLIN. And it's, you dip your plant in that, you make a mixture of water and you dip your plant in that. It kind of creates a shield barrier, like a shield that's still allowed to photosynthesize, but bugs can't get to it. So it's kind of interesting. It's worked for me in the last 3 years. So.
Awesome. Someone added that their eggplants liked beans and potatoes.
Yep. Yeah. Any legumes are pretty, you know, most plants like legumes for their nitrogen fixing, you know, capabilities.
I'll ask one more question here as we're running low on time. Someone asked about any tips to reduce plastic on the home scale gardening.
Yeah. Home scale, I think, yeah, it's, you know, a lot more attainable. I don't know, it depends on what you're using. Irrigation's a big one for us out here, is what we're using. You know, I know if you're familiar with drip line irrigation, it's what you lay on the ground, it drips out. It's very efficient on water consumption. So that's, you know, you can get into the weeds of what's better or what. But overhead watering, we use a lot of overhead watering, so we don't use a lot of plastic. I don't know. And I feel like on a home scale, it you know, you can be pretty self-sufficient without plastic. I mean, maybe not using drip tape. I guess I'd be curious what plastic consumption do you use on a home scale?
Actually, we'll ask one more question because I think this is a good point. Someone asked, should we overwinter our beds with rye or anything else to feed the soil?
Yeah. You know, good rule of thumb is never leave your soil bare. You know, cover crop's always going to be, you know, important to have. But you just have to have a plan for, like, say you're overwintering a cover crop. You're going to want to maximize that cover crop. So say it's a overwintered rye or vetch or peas. And we want those peas and rye, the point of the cover crop to get it like to its maximum potential before mowing it in. So if you want to plant that bed early April, you know, or late March, you're going to want to not have it cover cropped. But putting like leaves on top or straw or, you know, something finer like that. I would stay away from wood chips. You know, a note on wood chips is that it's going to tie up a lot of nitrogen, meaning that once that's hitting that soil, nitrogen's going to focus its energy on, the soil's going to focus its energy on breaking down that wood chip, and it's going to need a lot of it, especially if it's not very ground. But with like leaves or straw, you can easily remove that. It's just a lot easier to remove, and it's going to break down a lot faster. However, it's going to be like with wood chips, we're experienced that. We tried our pathways in that this last year was a failed experiment, and now we're dealing with a lot of wood chips in our bed, and it's very, very hard to get out of.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. I think that brings us close to time. Thank you guys for everyone who showed up. And if anyone has any more questions, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So any follow-up questions, I will try and answer those. And I'll be sending a follow-up email out to everyone through Eventbrite. And again, this will all be posted to Allegheny Mountain Institute's YouTube. So you can reference all these slides again and everything that Pat's been talking about. So great to look back at. Also, feel free to check our website for future workshops. We'd love to see you there. Donations can also be made on our website and are greatly appreciated. They really help fund our fellowship and all of our community programs. Our Farm and Food Fellowship priority deadline is also approaching. So if you're interested or may know someone who's interested, please check that out at our website as well. Thank you everyone for joining.